Listen, Microsoft relied on inertia for decades. Sure, Windows has its problems, but everything runs on Windows. Where else will I go? Guess what? That's not...
Picture this. You wake up, make your coffee, open your laptop, and discover that the operating system you've been using for years is now literally illegal in 3 countries. Not discouraged. Not flagged, banned, completely, officially, by entire national governments. South Korea didn't send a warning. Brazil didn't write a strongly worded letter. Australia's hospitals looked at Windows 11, ran their own internal tests, and their legal teams came back with one verdict. Deploying this software could send us to prison. And before you think this is about some underground hack or pirated junk, no. This is the genuine, fully certified, Satya Nadella-approved Windows 11 that shipped to hundreds of millions of PCs. The one probably sitting on your desk right now. Here's where it gets truly staggering. In a single night, Microsoft lost $180 billion in market value. Not over a year, not across a rough quarter. One night, and the story of how that happened is the biggest software collapse in human history. The earnings call that shook Wall Street.
Microsoft's own security response center, 11,791 security vulnerabilities in 2025. 2024 had 1,393. You do the...
June 2025, Microsoft's quarterly earnings call. CFO Amy Hood steps to the podium and delivers a number nobody on Wall Street was ready for. Windows revenue down 18% in a single quarter. Let that land for a second. Windows doesn't just drop 18%. This isn't a rounding error or a slow season. This is a cliff, a free fall, the kind of number that triggers emergency meetings in boardrooms around the world. Then a Goldman Sachs analyst asks the question everyone in the room is thinking. How much of this is because businesses are outright refusing to install Windows 11? Amy Hood's answer? She described it as deployment delays in certain segments. Corporate speak for companies are walking out. The market didn't need a translator. Microsoft's stock dropped 7% overnight, erasing $180 billion in value before sunrise. And the internal documents that leaked shortly after told the full story. Fortune 500 companies weren't just stalling. They were planning complete exits, permanent ones. If you're running Windows 11 right now, you are beta testing software that entire governments have already rejected. Let that sink in. Seoul says goodbye Korea's total breakup with Windows.
Because in business, trust and reliability are currency. And once that's gone, it doesn't matter how advanced your AI is. People are going...
Let's talk about South Korea, because what happened there isn't just a policy change, it's a geopolitical earthquake. In May 2025, Seoul announced that all 1.2 million government computers must fully migrate away from Windows 11 within 18 months. Not consider alternatives, not evaluate options. Leave now. The reasons hit like a checklist of Microsoft's worst failures. First, Windows 11's mandatory Microsoft account requirement directly violates Korean data sovereignty laws. Second, Korean language support in Windows 11 is broken, and we're talking about a country where the entire population uses that language. Third, performance on the same hardware is actually worse than Windows 10, a system that launched back in 2015. Microsoft shipped something slower than an 11-year-old product and called it an upgrade. Korea's response wasn't a complaint, it was a construction project. They built their own Linux-based system called Harmony KR, invested $340 million into the transition, trained 18,000 IT personnel, and already migrated 140,000 computers before Microsoft even had time to panic. And panic they did. Microsoft flew executives directly to Seoul. They offered customized enterprise editions. They floated substantial discounts. Korea's response was polite but final. The money is already spent. The decision is made. We're good. The domino effect is already rolling. Samsung is testing Linux across 80,000 workstations. LG is evaluating it for 35,000 machines. Hyundai is piloting it on 28,000 systems. Microsoft didn't just lose a government contract. They're losing the world's 10th largest economy, one corporate workstation at a time. When hospitals started getting subpoena ready,
apparently Microsoft has already deemed the current version a failure based on significant privacy and security concerns with Windows.
Now here's where it stops being a business story and starts being genuinely alarming. Royal Melbourne Hospital. A real hospital, with real patients, with real medical records. They ran a controlled test of Windows 11 on 200 computers. What they found wasn't a bug, it was a crisis. Microsoft's recall feature, even with the settings supposedly disabled, was actively screenshotting patient medical records in the background. And Microsoft's Copilot AI was transmitting snippets of that medical data directly to Microsoft's cloud servers. Their legal department didn't hesitate. The conclusion was unambiguous. Deploying this software creates serious legal exposure under Australian healthcare privacy law. So they migrated to Linux, the entire hospital. They were not alone. St. Vincent's in Sydney moved 3,100 machines to Linux. Royal Adelaide migrated 2,400. Alfred Hospital Melbourne switched 1,900. That's 47,000 healthcare workstations in Australia alone, gone from Windows in a matter of months. The UK's National Health Service issued formal warnings. Germany is actively evaluating alternatives. Canada is running pilot programs. The message spreading through global healthcare is unmistakable. Windows 11 is a compliance catastrophe. If your systems handle patient data, this software is a lawsuit you haven't filed yet. Brazil's Declaration of Digital Independence.
Forbes. Microsoft gave the FBI BitLocker encryption keys. Now, BitLocker is Windows disk encryption. It's supposed to protect your data and make it unreadable.
February 2025. Brazil doesn't announce a policy review, they announce a sovereignty initiative. The goal: migrate 2.8 million government computers to a homegrown Linux system called Linux Soberano Portuguese for sovereign Linux within 4 years. This isn't about Windows being slow or annoying. Brazil watched for years as American tech companies quietly became the infrastructure of the world's government. They watched as US intelligence agencies pressured those same companies for data access. And they decided that running their government on software they don't own or control is a national security risk they're no longer willing to accept. The private sector followed immediately. Petrobras, Brazil's national oil giant, is moving 45,000 computers to Linux. Brazil's national bank is shifting 78,000 systems. Eletrobras is migrating 12,000 machines. These aren't startups experimenting with open source. These are the pillars of one of the world's largest economies, and they're walking away from Windows with intent. China's countdown clock just got moved up.
Everything lives on Microsoft servers. You don't just lose ownership of your software, you lose ownership of your work.
April 2025. China didn't just continue their existing Windows elimination program, they accelerated it by 18 months. The new hard deadline is December. The scale of what that means is difficult to wrap your head around. 62 million government and state enterprise computers switching to Chinese-built Linux alternatives. Simultaneously, the platforms replacing Windows aren't experiments. Kylin OS, Deepin, and UOS are mature, government-certified operating systems that have been in development for years, specifically for this moment. And the private sector isn't waiting for a mandate either. Alibaba has already migrated 140,000 systems to Deepin. Tencent moved 98,000 computers to UOS. ByteDance, the company behind TikTok, switched 52,000 machines to Kylin. The financial damage to Microsoft from China alone is estimated at $8 billion annually, and that number grows every quarter as the migration accelerates. China's reasoning is blunt. Windows 11's constant cloud connectivity isn't just a privacy concern in China's context, it's a geopolitical vulnerability they've decided is unacceptable. Europe's privacy reckoning, a $10 billion threat.
Microsoft's not selling you Windows. They're selling you, your data, your habits, your privacy to advertisers and AI models. And guess what? You don't get a choice.
While governments in Asia and South America act, Europe is building a legal case. The European Commission launched a formal investigation into Windows 11's compliance with the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, and the findings that have leaked are not good for Microsoft. The investigation has identified multiple ways in which Windows 11 violates EU privacy law. The potential consequences are severe. Fines approaching $10 billion, forced suspension of Windows 11 sales across the continent, and mandatory removal of features like Recall and Copilot from European deployments. For context, the EU is one of Microsoft's most important markets. This isn't a fine they can absorb and move on from. This is an existential threat to their operating system business in a 450 million person market. If you're in Europe and running Windows 11 right now, you're using software that is actively under criminal investigation for breaking privacy law. Think about that the next time it asks you to sign in with your Microsoft account. The corporate mutiny Fortune 500 draws up the exit papers. The public sector revolt is dramatic, but the corporate numbers are what will truly define whether Microsoft survives this era as the dominant OS provider, and those numbers are terrifying. Leaked internal memos from 83 Fortune 500 companies reveal coordinated plans to reduce Windows dependency across their organizations. One Fortune 50 company, meaning one of the 50 largest corporations on the planet, has a documented internal proposal to migrate 40% of their workforce, roughly 38,000 people, away from Windows entirely, splitting between Mac and Linux. If even half of these companies execute their plans, Microsoft loses between 2 and 3 million enterprise users. That translates to $800 million to $1.2 billion in annual revenue gone. Not gradually, gone. The corporate frustration comes down to a brutal equation. Windows 11 performs worse than Windows 10 on identical hardware, forcing expensive device refresh cycles nobody budgeted for. Microsoft has bundled AI features Copilot. Recall that enterprise customers never requested and cannot fully disable. These features introduce real security and compliance risks, particularly for any company handling regulated data. And the pricing keeps going up while the value proposition keeps going down. Companies aren't switching out of curiosity. They're switching because staying has become the riskier financial decision. Even the people who build software have had enough. There's a group whose opinion matters more than any government or any board of directors when it comes to the long-term future of an operating system. Developers. The people who build the tools the world runs on. And they left Windows a long time ago. The Stack Overflow Developer Survey has shown for years that Linux is the most loved operating system among professional developers. macOS dominates in creative and startup environments. Windows is increasingly the platform people use because their corporate IT department won't give them a choice, not because anyone actually wants it. When the people writing software stop building on your platform, the ecosystem starts to hollow out. The best tools get built for other systems first. The integrations come late or never. The developer experience degrades, and eventually, the companies that hire those developers start listening to them when they say, "We could do this better somewhere else." The real reasons? Windows 11 failed its users. Strip away the geopolitics and the billion-dollar figures, and you're left with something surprisingly simple. Windows 11 broke the implicit contract between Microsoft and its users. That contract said, "Give us your loyalty and your money, and we'll give you a fast, reliable, private computing experience that you control." Windows 11 violated every clause. It tracks your searches, your files, your browsing behavior, and there is no legitimate off switch. Recall can screenshot your screen in the background without meaningful warning. Copilot sends data to Microsoft servers whether you use it or not. You can no longer run Windows without a Microsoft account, surrendering a new layer of control to a company that has already demonstrated it will use that access. Performance regressed. Boot times got worse. RAM usage went up. The same machine that ran Windows 10 smoothly chugs on Windows 11. Microsoft essentially asked billions of users to pay more money, buy new hardware, accept slower performance, and hand over their privacy in exchange for an AI assistant they didn't want. Businesses looked at that offer and laughed. Then they started looking at Linux. What happens next and why it can't be undone? Here's the uncomfortable projection that Microsoft's internal teams are almost certainly already running. Once an organization migrates to Linux, the probability of return is extremely low. The migration cost has already been paid. The staff has been retrained. The workflows have been rebuilt. Going back means paying that cost all over again for zero gain. South Korea isn't coming back. Brazil isn't reconsidering. The Australian hospitals that rebuilt their entire IT infrastructure on Linux aren't going to rip it out because Microsoft released a patch. The trust required to rebuild that kind of institutional commitment takes a decade minimum, and trust, once shattered at this scale, doesn't just repair itself because the press release says it should. What we are watching in 2026 is not a temporary dip in Windows adoption figures. We are watching the first chapter of a permanent restructuring of the global operating system market. Linux, Mac OS, and locally built national alternatives are quietly inheriting the institutional trust that Windows spent 30 years accumulating and spent 3 years destroying. Microsoft will fight. They'll patch and pivot and rebrand and discount. Satya Nadella will give speeches about reinvention. There will be announcements and enterprise summits and carefully worded apologies. But the fundamental problem isn't fixable with a feature update. The problem is that the world's institutions looked at Windows 11 and decided that sovereignty, privacy, and control mattered more than convenience and familiarity. That is not a conclusion you walk back. If you're on Windows 11 right now, you are watching this in real time. The software on your screen is the center of the biggest institutional revolt in the history of computing. And whether Microsoft admits it publicly or not, Bill Gates' worst nightmare didn't begin with a competitor releasing a better product. It began the moment his company decided that what users wanted, control, speed, privacy, mattered less than what Microsoft wanted to extract from them. The world noticed. And the world is moving on. If this opened your eyes, hit like, drop a comment. Are you staying on Windows, or is it finally time to make the switch? Subscribe, because this collapse is only getting started.